I know you're all having an amazing time. And one more time, I want to thank the Bravo team, Maria, Indira, and the whole team for putting this together. I think the content this morning has really been extraordinary. And I've been to a lot of conferences. I don't want to admit how many, but it is rare that the room is full from the beginning to the end. And that is really a statement about content. And the second thing that I want to comment on, which I think is really important, is that this has been a real opportunity for people to get together and network. And I think it one more time really shows us that yes, Zoom has kept us alive, WebEx has kept us alive, but at the end of the day, people also want to spend time building relationships and rebuilding relationships. And for that, you really need to have meetings in person. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And I want to now, we're going to have our last conversation with our one of our honorees from this evening. He couldn't be here this morning because he arrived from Saudi Arabia. And I want to introduce our Bravo visionary CEO of the year, Pierpaolo Barbieri, who's the founder and CEO of Ualá. And he's going to talk a little bit about it. And of course, our dear friend Jorge Becerra, who's going to have a conversation with him. And if the conversation you had this morning with my dear friends from Casa is any example, it's going to be really a great conversation and lots of fun. So with that, I'm going to pass you the microphone. Again, thank you all for joining us. And let's welcome Pierpaolo and Jorge to the stage.
I think this is already working. Pierpaolo, we are so thankful for your traveling around the world and arriving almost 11 a.m., being lucky at immigrations and coming straight after a nice shower to this place.
At least I got the shower in. Thank you for the flexibility in terms of the timing, and I'm so honored to be here.
So, this morning we have been getting great stories regarding the region, the fintech, the incumbent. The last years that have been amazing in terms of growth and capital availability, but we wanted to go to get a note, and we know that we will have probably only 20 minutes, and we thank you for that flexibility, more on the personal story of how Ualá starting, and many of you would know that your background was not on economics necessarily, was as an historian. And there might be something in those genesis moment that might explain why eventually you came back to Latin America and you decided to create something that has high aspirations in transforming the region. So if you could share that story.
Yeah, the first thing to say is that I'm extremely lucky to be leading Ualá. Ualá was an idea that was born from financial crisis. I grew up in Argentina in the 1990s in a context of general macroeconomic stability, a rare thing for Argentina in the last century. And the crash of 2001 made me interested in history and economics, and I was extremely lucky to be able to attend college in the United States. In fact, I was one of the first beneficiaries of Professor Larry Summers's policies at Harvard that truly transformed one of the best universities in the world and allowed somebody like me that couldn't afford a tuition of $50,000 a year to be able to attend Harvard, and then proceeded to be at Cambridge, where I continued my studies in economic history. I wrote a book that nobody read about Nazi economics and the history of the Spanish Civil War. And my mentor once said to me that I wrote about Spain because I didn't feel the confidence to write about Argentina, which may have been true, but around 2015, after a decade in the United States, I had the idea of trying to fix, through technology, a key problem of the democracies in Latin America, and that is financial access. I am a firm believer that you cannot really ask people to believe in democracy and capitalism if you keep them outside of the system. Because if you keep them outside of the system, like 50% of adults are in Latin America and around 60% of the women, so this is also a gender issue, then there really is no incentive in believing in the system, because the possibility of social mobility is beyond you. And so why would you believe that the system works for everyone, that the republic is possible for everyone, if you're just not included? So when you have a context of high inflation, which sadly in Argentina was a reality well before this bout of inflation in the developed world that we haven't really seen since the Volcker era in the 80s and the Thatcher era in the UK, we leave people to have a worse outcome because they cannot protect themselves from inflation. And they cannot transact and therefore create a credit history. And so people that are doomed to living in cash have no property rights, as Hernando de Soto writes, but they also have no ability to protect themselves from inflation with savings, with investment tools. We have no credit penetration, which means we don't have a FICO score. And therefore, the rich always get the best loans, and the banks only bank the people that they want to bank, which are, unsurprisingly, the rich. And we live in societies where there are very few bank licenses. And where there are very few bank licenses, just for context, in the United States there's 5,000 banks. In Mexico there's 48. And in Colombia there's only 36. And in Argentina there's 65. And so just for context, Panama has more banks than Mexico or Argentina. And so when there are few licenses, there's little competition. And that means that over 50% of the population is just left out. Technology has a transformational power in changing that. And it's also particularly interesting that a historian gets to be able to lead a company that tries to fix that problem.
What I think is distinctive about your story and the story of Ualá, that as many other tech entrepreneurs have thought about, the benefits that digitalization would bring in terms of, access or functionalities, your sense of these aspirations of getting inclusion and higher level of freedoms to live with access to the basic things, it has been probably moving most of your intent in this process.
A British Prime Minister used to say, you got to grab the coattails of history. And if there's one thing that I know every morning, is that today there are going to be more digital transactions than there were yesterday. 70% of the economy in China moves in digital transactions. Over 50% in the US, over 50% in Europe. Brazil is moving farther ahead than the rest of the region. But the region, Latin America, is stuck at around 20. All I know is that tomorrow there are going to be more. And so we need to decide if we're going to have a society where we have a bifurcation between those who have access and those that don't, or we're going to include everyone. And I think inclusion can be a great business, because as we've seen in other stories in the region, other successful stories, technology has the power to drastically cut the costs of access. And that allows us to do a better product for more people. Mm-hmm. And for that product to be simple, so that somebody can use it who hasn't finished primary school, but also somebody who has a master's degree in a United States university can also access it. And so there's a great opportunity, and I was discussing this of all places in Saudi Arabia this week. There are very few places in the world where you have the kind of amount of people with the amount of youth and the amount of economic opportunities that are in Latin America today, with the demographic boom that we have, and that we're only going to have for another, if we go by Goldman's data, for another only 25 years. So we either develop the region now or we won't get to.
And I think you are somehow highlighting the good elements of the opportunity in terms of the starting positions for social demographics, the needs of population, but at the same time you are facing maybe some of the hurdles that the region traditionally offer. What has been your view and interactions and way of dealing with either incumbents, so the established players in financial services, and even the regulators to really either facilitate or somehow limit those opportunities?
Difficult question. I am convinced that in Latin America we sometimes misunderstand capitalism. Capitalism isn't about getting our own little monopoly and extracting rents. That's not capitalism. Capitalism is competition. And unfortunately, we could be better at getting used to competing. And I think that the technology sector is a sector where capital availability and talent availability give us the opportunity to really transform capitalism in the region. I openly and publicly celebrate every single one of my competitors' achievements. And I do it on social media so that everybody sees me doing it. The same way I do customer service so that everyone in my management team, no matter if they come from McKinsey or Goldman Sachs or whatever, have to sit down and do customer service as well. Because that's what has a transformational power in organizations and in seeking talent. We really need to change the region, and we need to understand that in order to innovate, you have to compete with someone. Because if you seek a monopoly, it'll stifle your ability to really progress. It will allow you to extract rents for a while. But the truth is that when the foreigners come, and they will come, because this region is open also to investment from abroad, we're not going to be able to have indigenous solutions for our own problems, and we're going to depend on the innovation of others. And so I celebrate my competitors and I celebrate competition because I think it's an important social value that goes well beyond Ualá. And some people are hurt when they tell them that things are not going to work. I feel motivated by that. When people said to me that I was a historian, so I couldn't lead Ualá, or one of our largest investors said, I have two rules. I don't invest in non-technical founders, and I don't invest in Argentines. And I was like, okay, great. Now he owns 5% of the company, so we did something right. I think the opportunity is so large in our region, and the talent is there. That's another thing. I spent this week in the Gulf, and they are desperate for talent. We have so many people that have left Latin America. So many of you are here, and many of you have made this country your home. But there are so many ties that we can help us bring back the talent from studying abroad and being successful abroad to innovating in our own countries. And other places don't have that. We do. We are the sons and daughters of great pioneers that have built great companies in the region. We were first movers in the technology change that started in the late 90s with some of the people that we're also honoring today, like Kazek, and the people that started world-class companies like Mercado Libre, like Globant, like OLX, like so many others. And I think the opportunity is there for us to really transform these societies, and technology gives us that chance because of the lower costs and the ability to democratize access.
You mentioned about Argentina and your origins, and I got maybe the sense of your willingness to give back and your willingness to come back to Argentina after those 13 years. At the same time, we Argentinians feel normally that sense of el pasado nos condena, or a bit of a pecado original on this one. Maybe one of the investors felt the same. But the reality was that I think in 2019, in the moment where Argentina was changing gears in terms of the political environment, you managed to get some sizable funding on that. How the investors are really thinking or unbundling the situation of the karma of Argentina to the karma of Ualá and its potential?
I think that investors tend to try to look beyond the very particular political context. This is easier to do in certain geographies than others. A lot of people made fun of me because when we launched Ualá, the day we launched Ualá, I gave an interview to InfoBay, one of the best news sources in the region, and I said that we were going to lose money for 6 to 8 years. And most people don't invest with that time frame in Argentina, but Soros, General Catalyst, and Kevin Ryan, who are our seed investors, saw beyond because they understood 3 things. Number 1, the size of the opportunity. Number 2, the difference in talent. And number 3, the power of technology. Even more than I. Because I remember we started and we thought we were going to be issuing 50 to 100 cards a day. And last month we created 250,000 accounts in 1 month. And 60% of those people had never had access to a card before. So that means 250,000 new savings accounts, 250,000 new investors, 250,000 new people that can take payments, because merchant acquiring is one of our largest and fastest growing divisions. 250,000 people who can have a credit history, so they can have a first loan, so then they can eventually have a credit card, and eventually, one day in some geographies, a mortgage. The power of technology is very big to transform, and we've seen it in India, we've seen it in China, and Latin America has if put together, has half the GDP of China and the population of India, if you think about it all together.
Yeah.
And so there are opportunities there, and we have to see beyond this election or that election, which is very difficult for the locals. I understand it. I live in that too. I'm addicted to the political news as well. But you need to really be able to see beyond that if you want to build the kind of companies that transform and go beyond a place. We spent 35 months getting a bank license in Colombia. We built it from scratch. And we spent 27 months waiting for the approval by the Argentine Central Bank to acquire a bank in Argentina. And we were the first fintech, and thus far the only one to be able to access a bank license. Part of it is not taking no for an answer, but also part of it is having investors that understand that creating value takes time, and that if you have the right team with the right priorities and the right market, you're eventually going to succeed. So, in fact, we're going to break even Argentina in 5.5 years. It was less than the original 7.5 that I predicted. But you need to have people that really believe in that. At the same time, I will say that some people benefit from the lack of capital access. I'm ashamed of the fact that in 2019, 95% of the dollars raised by Argentine venture capital were Ualá. Because that means there cannot be another Ualá. And I want somebody to come beat me at my own game. And so we have, unfortunately, business elites that at times have benefited from not having anyone come compete. But I think that stifles us because I think hardship builds resilience. And I saw that in 2001 in my personal story, but I also see it in my company. I think when we compete with others, it makes us better.
You mentioned now about the initial getting love and giving back to Argentina, but with this regional and even global vision, you start mentioning about Colombia. What is the next phase of the journey for Ualá in terms both of the regional expansion and the extension of the offering that you would be serving the region?
So when we started, we had modest ambitions, and I have to say that one of our investors understood we were doing far better than us. We wanted to do something simple, which was one card and one account. That's it, nothing else. Digital onboarding, download the app, we give you a MasterCard. And with that, oh my God, you can pay for Netflix. Because when we launched, believe it or not, people would pay double the cost of Netflix on Mercado Libre because they didn't have a card. And so they had to pay, the poor had to pay double for Netflix because they didn't have a way to transact. So we give cards to everyone. Doesn't matter how much you make, doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter how you look. And I will never forget that a lady that runs an amazing foundation in Argentina 4 months after our launch emailed me to say that she was recommending Ualá to the women she worked with, and she works with women that single mothers that have a difficult sort of life situation. And I said, one of the largest banks in Argentina is your sponsor. Why would you recommend Ualá, not your sponsor? And she said to me, and I'll never forget, because even though the sponsor gives us money, when our women go to the bank branch, the security guard says, no, ma'am, the way you're dressed, you can't come in here. And so the attack and the destruction was done by a person that didn't even really want to. And the lack of access is embedded in the system in such a way that we wanted to transform it with the simplest of things. But eventually, that led us to listen to our customers and build kind of a real ecosystem around it. Because once you've given somebody a way to transact and buy Netflix and Spotify, then they need to be able to top up their transport card, which used to be charged for, and then they want to pay their bills and be able to pay their water bill or their gas bill. And we didn't do the things that monetized the most at first. We did the things that built that day-to-day transactionality. And then we built the two key areas of banking, because the truth is that since the Medicis, we haven't really innovated in banking very much. You need a product to transact, and you need a product for when you have more money than you need, i.e. investing and protecting yourself from inflation, and then eventually getting into other types of investing. And what happens when you have less money than you need? Credit. And the credit penetration data in our region is dismal. The rich have access to amazing credit, and we all fight about the perks of our credit cards and what kind of miles we get, and the rest have nothing. And so what we did at Ualá was build those two things. First, a money market fund that has the lowest fees in the market. Right now, there's around 2.5 million people in Argentina using that to protect themselves against inflation. And between Mercado Libre and us, we have 75% of the investment accounts in the country, believe it or not. And then the credit product, which I'm particularly proud of, because that means that we've built the credit histories for millions of people who didn't have it. So in Argentina, 16% of the country has a Ualá, 30% of the young. There's 3.5 million people with a credit score. There's a Ualá credit score that allows us to give somebody, a $20 or $30 first loan, and then build from there to having, loans that go to $20,000. And eventually, we also realized that a lot of our customers were small businesses. And so just like we give those services to individuals, if we really wanted to digitize, and suddenly there were millions and millions of cards around, we had to also build the ability for those businesses to take the money and be able to charge. But Latin America is a very unfair place where to charge, because the service that Square sells here for 2.2% in Argentina costs 6.5%, because there was one player that provided that service. Well, guess what? Now there's Ualá, and we charge 50% less. And we eat market share every month, and we are able to get more businesses to build their online store or take payments in cards than ever before. And so that builds an ecosystem. And eventually we took that to Mexico, and we took that to Colombia. There are other geographies where we're working to launch, but I cannot talk about that. But the truth is that there's an amazing opportunity in the region. And I don't know many things, and I hope we do well, but there are other players that are also helping us compete. And so it's a great honor to have some of the best companies in the region, like Mercado Libre or Nubank, compete against us, because that means that we wake up every morning and we have something to aspire to, which is to beat them. And that keeps us honest, and I think they have the same motivation. And capital allows that, but you also need the talent. And so at Ualá, we try to only attract people that are better than ourselves. And so I hire people that are better than me, and I make it a mandate for everyone that if we don't hire better people than ourselves, we really cannot scale, because otherwise we have too many things to do and too little time. So,
as a final observation from you, we discussed this morning many of the uncertainties of the macroeconomic, the geopolitical, and looking ahead of the next, let's say, 18, 24 months in the region, where there have been this growth of many fintech, many startups that probably would be compromised in terms of their ability to scale up based on many good things that they have done. How are you envisioning I wouldn't say, your approach to face that situation and eventually either integrate M&A, some of those activities that might help you accelerate your own journey and or be exposed to new talent that would become available with some of this, let's say, aggregation or concentration of players might happen?
I go back to an idea that I was talking about. Difficulty creates resilience and breeds resilience. I think that obviously we come from years of immense capital availability. That has started to change last year, at the end of last year, and I think it changed more radically this year. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that we are in a great position, and we've been acquiring companies this year. We closed 2 acquisitions that are public. One, a company that has boosted our merchant acquiring offering by allowing every small business the ability to create a store online. And we are creating around 7,000 to 10,000 new stores every month, just in Argentina. But as you can imagine, that'll go international very soon. And then a company that helps us on credit to be able to diversify the options that we have on credit. Those deals wouldn't have been available last year, because these companies that, frankly, they were more like features than standalone companies, would have been able to raise money on their own. The other difference is that, unlike other sectors, I don't need to explain to people that finance and banking makes money, especially in Latin America. The 3 most profitable markets, 3 of the most profitable markets in the world for financial services are Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina. Why? Because there's little competition. Because there's been a lot of rents that have gone to the same players for a long, long time. That's why President López Obrador always talks about all the foreigners owning every single bank in Mexico. And he's not wrong about that. He may be wrong about other things, but he's definitely not wrong about that. And in the European financial crisis, we saw European players that would rather sell their domestic European operations than sell Mexico. So the profit pool is there in financial services. And I think that there is an opportunity to really increase the size of the market because we are in a region where, despite the global macro problems, Brazil and Mexico have two of the most respectable central banks that moved ahead of the curve, and this year they may have lower inflation than the United States. And so I think the opportunities in the region are very good in the next 18 months. I also think there are some elections that will really create a change, potentially for the better. And I'm extremely excited about the future. It also helps that we're breaking even our operation 2 years ahead of schedule in Argentina. And I think, again, that the investors will want to see companies do that more rather than plan for growth and not worry about negative unit economics forever. I think that that world has changed, and well, good riddance, because 10 years of zero rates created a lot of distortions that were not sustainable in the long run. And we really need to build companies that are sustainable in the long run. When we try to take shortcuts in Latin America, it usually ends badly.
Pierpaolo, many, many thanks. I think we need to move out now to the main sort of stage. But I guess hopefully the award that you're receiving today would be a small but important booster to really renew your sense of purpose on what you are doing and keep you energized as you have shown us today for the next stage. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I am sure I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful anyway.